What motivation did I have? What malice have I ever shown to anyone? What benefit would I gain? I am a person who loves all people and has no malice towards anyone, not even the prosecutors who wrongfully try to convict me.
Well, hey, folks, based on the prosecution's opening statement in the Arizona trial of Vallow Daybell, the state presented a detailed and methodically constructed case of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. In that murder case against Vallow Daybell, attempting to kill Brandon Bedreau, her former nephew-in-law. Now, Lori, well, she's talking about Cain and Abel and people who conspired against her God. So let's look over the opening statements in the state of Arizona once again versus Vallow Daybell. Hey, welcome to Profiling Evil. I hope you'll take a moment, hit the like and subscribe button. Make sure that you've got notifications turned on so you don't miss any of our content. And thanks so much for joining us as we dig into, once again, the Vallow Daybell case. Now, the prosecution came out of the gate swinging in their opening statement, stating outright that they alleged that Vallow Daybell conspired with her brother, Alex Cox, to murder Brandon Bedreau on October 2nd, 2019 in Gilbert, Arizona. Now, Bedreau was previously married to Lori's niece. She's the daughter of Lori's sister, Stacy Cope, who died back in 1998. The state of Arizona claims that Lori was deeply involved in the planning, in aiding and covering up the attempted murder of Brandon Bedreau, providing evidence that ties her directly to nearly every preparatory step. Now, they started off by leveling allegations that Lori had motive through her close relationship with her niece. Now, the state alleges that Daybell and the niece turned against Brandon during his divorce from the niece. Lori is accused of spreading lies about Brandon and even suggested, according to his testimony today, that he was gay, that he hacked Lori's computer, and that he was trying to damage her niece, his wife's, church membership status. Now, the prosecution says these lies were reportedly used to sway the niece's loyalty toward Lori, and that justified ending their marriage. The state then started painting a picture of their allegations of Lori's conspirative actions to murder Bedreau, starting with allowing Alex Cox to use her deceased husband's vehicle, a Jeep Wrangler, to travel from Idaho to Arizona, all for the purpose of murdering Bedreau. Now, they allege that Cox parked the Jeep outside of Bedreau's home and fired a bullet from his rifle at Brandon as he returned home. The bullet narrowly missed the man, who says he saw the muzzle flash, heard the sound of the gunshot, and felt the impact as his side window shattered. Now, the state alleges that Daybell aided Cox in preparing for this attempted murder hit by allowing Cox to have the Jeep's windows tinted as dark as legally allowed. She also helped him purchase a burner phone, confirmed by cell tower data and Wi-Fi usage at the Walmart there in Idaho Falls. And she even researched how to remove the Jeep's back seat, likely to make room for Alex to hide with that rifle. Now, according to prosecutors, Daybell also provided an alibi for Cox by having him leave his personal cell phone with her in Idaho, where she staged a number of calls to build some kind of digital proof that he was in Idaho, not traveling with that burner phone that he mistakenly used his Google account to sign in on, which tied him to that phone. And that phone tied him to that shooting. Now, the state plans on sharing digital and physical evidence that supports that Alex was searching on that same burner phone for Brandon's address, that he was looking up things like gun trajectory data and routes to escape after the shooting. And they say that All of this is going to prove that Lori's own Google search, the history of her search, also included how to remove the back seat of a Jeep Wrangler. They're going to show from Arizona license plate readers, those are called LPRs or ALPRs, that captured the Jeep traveling from Idaho to Arizona. And they're going to show video in Idaho where Lori and her future co-defendant and husband, Chad Daybell, were seen placing the Jeep's back seat and spare tire into a storage unit, suggesting cleanup efforts. So look for forensic evidence like gunshot residue, GSR. That was found in the back of the Jeep. And they also performed DNA analysis, which showed Alex Cox's DNA on the Jeep's steering wheel, the gear shift, the seat belts, all putting him in that vehicle that happened to travel to Arizona, that happened to pull up in front of Brandon Bedreau's house, and someone inside happened to fire a round trying to kill him. Now, the state of Arizona is going to show that Lori and Alex Googled news reports after the shooting to kind of gauge what police might know. And I think we can plan on a quick trial in this one that's going to be filled with a ton of evidence. I think most of it will go unchallenged because Lori Daybell is defending herself. And it's clear that she's the underdog in lawyering and in the evidence. That became even more apparent when she offered her defense opening statement. Acting as her own attorney, Lori Daybell's opening statement offered a blend of personal narrative, emotional appeals, and legal minimization. In my opinion, her strategy aimed to paint herself as a loving family member wrongfully accused, while casting doubt on the investigation and suggesting that others were responsible for misleading law enforcement. Now, her defense seems to center on three primary themes. Number one, that she wasn't even there. So go figure, conspiracy. That she had no motive or animosity toward Brandon, and that Brandon is the one conspiring to frame her. And I would bet, based on what she had to say today and previous comments she's made in court and to the media, that she's going to deny involvement and certainly presence. But she's also going to allow Alex Cox to be thrown under the bus. Now, somehow, in her mind, she believes that if she wasn't there, she isn't culpable. Well, Lori repeatedly stated in her opening statement that she wasn't in Arizona on October 2nd, 2019, the day of the attempted murder. She emphasized that she was unaware that the shooting even occurred until much later, and she claims that she had no control over Alex Cox's actions. Watch out for the bus, Alex, because despite their close relationship, she says, had nothing to do with decisions that he was making. And then, in classic Lori Daybell form, she described herself as someone who, quote, loves all people and has no malice, close quote. Even claiming that she loves the prosecutors despite their alleged efforts to wrongfully convict her. Now, she claimed that her relationship with Brandon had always been friendly, with no reason to try to harm him, no motive at all to harm him. And she characterized her role in her niece's life as motherly. Again, due to the niece's mother, Lori's sister, dying when the child was 9. So I think you can go to the bank on the hedge that Lori is going to continue to cast doubt on the state's case. Because even in her opening statement, she repeatedly called the prosecution's case speculation, innuendo, and insinuation, claiming that there was a lack of direct evidence and that the state is simply relying on theories about what Lori was thinking or planning, things that she says they don't know anything about. And in her opening statement, Daybell told the jury that they were there to decide whether a crime had even occurred, suggesting that Brandon may have fabricated or at least misrepresented the shooting, including, I guess, that bullet hole in his vehicle, the glass that exploded around his face, and the 911 call he made. She highlighted how Brandon hired a private investigator shortly after this attempt on his life, that he exchanged emails with the detective and allegedly discussed how the niece could financially benefit if he were to die, framing all of this as his example of conspiracy. But then she asked the jury to consider the inconsistencies in Brandon's story about the color of the Jeep and said, boy, that really should call into question his credibility. And then, to remind everybody that she's acting as her own attorney, Lori decided to twist legal language with her biblical references, making reference to conspiracies such as she says, Judas conspiring against Jesus, or Cain conspiring against Abel. Now, I'm not a biblical scholar, but I don't believe Cain conspired to kill Abel. Cain was driven by jealousy and anger after God rejected his sacrifice, leading him to murder his brother. The story doesn't suggest any planning or premeditation, as does the Daybell case. But rather, in that Cain and Abel case, it talked about a sudden, impulsive act fueled by emotion. And I think that that's the only thing that's even close to being comparable in these two. But enough of that. Lori has attempted to educate the jury on legal definitions of conspiracy, arguing that it requires mutual agreement and intent, which is true, both of which she denies having anything to do with. She emphasized again the burden of proof is on the state, and she doesn't have to testify or prove her innocence. The state has to prove that she's guilty. And then she pulled out one of her favorites by emphasizing that Alex Cox is deceased and not here to defend himself, possibly hoping to elicit some sympathy or sow some doubt about his alleged role and her connection to it, because she repeatedly asked the jury to decide for themselves, to listen carefully, because only they had the power to determine the facts. And then she ended with a dramatic line, and like I said before, this is all about a stage. She said, quote, "I'm all about spreading love, and I'll continue to do so even after this trial's complete, no matter the result," close quote. Well, all of this information delivered by Lori Daybell came at a price, because I think the jury watched as the prosecution objected frequently, accusing Lori of making improper arguments rather than presenting a preview of evidence. That's what's required in an opening statement. Now, the judge sustained most of the objections and reminded the jury that opening statements are not evidence. In fact, Judge Boreski corrected Lori multiple times for misstating the law, for referencing irrelevant religious narratives, and introducing arguments prematurely. So this opening phase of the state of Arizona versus Lori Daybell set the stage for another courtroom drama steeped in delusion, deflection, and doctrine. On one side, the prosecution presented the precise, evidence-driven chronology of a botched murder plot, while on the other hand, Lori Daybell attempted to woo the jury with spirituality, with sentimentality, and with some self-pity. But for a woman accused of conspiring to kill her niece's estranged husband, her strategy to represent herself might already be backfiring in the eyes of the jury, because that prosecutor took 26 minutes to present the state's case. Her delivery was clear, chronological. It was focused on digital breadcrumbs, cell tower data, forensic evidence, and motive. And every minute was used to construct a theory that was grounded in behavior, timing, and physical evidence. They showed how the Jeep was altered, how the burner phones and Gmail activity exposed movement, and how searches on the internet directly aided Alex Cox to try to commit this homicide. There were no theatrics, no tangents, just a careful layering of facts that was meant to make it impossible for the jury to think anything else other than it was planned. In contrast, Lori took 16 minutes and wandered through her personal relationships of how she loves everyone, her religious allegories of Cain and Abel and Judas, and her philosophical musings of who is the state, and of course, her claims, hey, I wasn't even in Arizona. She says Brandon is the only one who says that a crime occurred. Again, I find that offensive. But instead of previewing evidence, she presented a victim narrative that the judge had to keep trimming back. She accused prosecutors of speculation, law enforcement of bias, and Brandon of manipulating the case with private investigators, all built on revenge motives. Meanwhile, her tone was often self-righteous and emotionally overcharged. And I've said it before, and I'll probably say it again, that Lori's choice to represent herself is akin to tactical suicide. Sure, it's her right. But as the old legal maxim goes, a person who represents themselves has a fool for a client. And Lori is now facing first-degree conspiracy to commit murder charges. Yet, she stood in court completely untrained in evidentiary law, courtroom decorum, and legal strategy. And I think the jury walked away today with an impression that the defendant talked more about love than the law, that she was corrected time and time again by a judge, and she didn't preview any actual evidence to suggest that she's innocent. Her defense is emotional, self-referential, and deeply adversarial toward Brandon Bedreau and the prosecution. She presents herself as a scapegoat caught in the crossfire of a contentious divorce and a biased investigation. She's a loving aunt and a sister who simply was there for a child who needed help. So, how would you be leaning after today's opening statements? Would you be thinking that Lori Daybell is the victim of a system? I hope you'll put your comments down below. I think Lori's courtroom performance may have initially intrigued some jurors, but I would bet she failed to land any persuasive legal blows. And worse, her strategy of acting like a misunderstood saint only widened the gap between the charges and her character portrayals. So let me know what you think. Put your thoughts in the comments down below. And again, do you think Lori believes her own story, or is she just playing for sympathy? And make sure you subscribe to Profiling Evil's channel. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos when we drop them. And follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And if you like getting your true crime fix on the go, get Profiling Evil's audio podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. And friends, if you want to understand how cults like Lori and Chad's operates, pick up my book, Deceived, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society cult. It's a deep dive in how these manipulators recruit, control, and justify the unthinkable, all under the guise of religion. And you can get signed copies at profilingevil.com, where I'll ship them to you anywhere in the United States for free. And while you're there, check out my latest book, She Knew No Fear. This is a story about solving my great-great-grandmother's murder in 1891. I think you'll really like that one. And please stay tuned for my new book coming out next month. Hey, thanks for your support of Profiling Evil. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.
As you can see, we have extra jurors just in case someone can't proceed, which you've observed that we already had to use or let one juror go. At this time, the state can proceed with its opening statement.
Thank you. a Texas license plate, no rear tire, and dark tint was parked right up next to Brandon Boudreau's driveway, idle. At 9:13 a.m. on October 2nd of 2019, Brandon Boudreau returned home. That Jeep had been idling there already for over an hour. When Brandon turned onto his street, he immediately noticed this Jeep because it was parked so close to his driveway. A rifle barrel come out and point at him. And then bang! He heard a shot and his window shattered right next to him. Brandon hit the accelerator and he took off. He turned the corner and drove a block or so away and stopped, calling 911. He talked to the operator and told them where this Jeep was going. As Brandon was speaking with the 911 operator, he had no idea that that bullet had struck his car just a few inches from his head. You'll learn that in the back of that Jeep was this defendant's brother, Alex Cox. He had been lying in wait with a rifle for Brandon to return home. This defendant, Lori Vallow Daybell, the woman seated over here, had loaned her Jeep to her brother so he could drive it to Arizona. So he could be in the back of that Jeep with very dark tint that no one could see through and wait for Brandon to return home. The goal of this defendant and her co-conspirators? To shoot and kill Brandon Boudreau. So let's talk about October 2nd and the weeks leading up to that. All of the actions that this defendant did in furtherance of that conspiracy and the premeditated murder of Brandon Boudreau. I'm going to start with a little background for you. In June of 2019, Brandon Boudreau was still married to his then wife, Melanie. You're going to learn that Melanie is this defendant's niece. You're going to learn they were very close. And you're going to learn that they both had it out for Brandon. On June 25th, Brandon and Melanie got into an argument. And Brandon learned that this defendant had told his wife that he was gay, that he had hacked into her computer, and that Brandon was trying to work with her then husband to take her temple recommend away. You're going to learn that many of the people, including Brandon and this defendant, are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And having your temple recommend taken away is a very significant event. You're going to learn and see that Brandon actually texted Lori Vallow on the 25th of June to confront her about these lies, and that she never responded. By July, just a short while later, Brandon and Melanie were seeing a mediator and proceeding through a divorce. You're going to also hear that during this time, Lori Vallow and Alex Cox lived here in Arizona. In fact, Lori lived in Chandler. You're going to hear about an incident that occurred on July 11th of 2019 in Chandler involving Lori Vallow and Alex Cox. The Chandler police were out at this defendant's residence, and they took photographs of some vehicles. One of those vehicles was a 2018 Jeep Wrangler with Texas license plates, LWD 0997. That will be very important to you. They also noted that Alex had his own car, a Ford F-150. Both of those vehicles were in Chandler in July. You're going to learn that in August or September, or August through September, Lori Vallow and her brother Alex Cox moved up to Rexburg, Idaho, to be closer to this defendant's soon-to-be husband, Chad Daybell. Both of them moved into a complex at 565 Pioneer Road in Rexburg, Idaho. Lori took the Jeep Wrangler and a Nissan Rogue, and Alex brought his Ford F-150. So everyone had their own vehicles. You're going to learn that as the divorce is proceeding between Brandon and his then wife, Melanie, that they put their house up for sale. And Melanie moved out and got a rental property. When their house finally sold, Brandon had to rent a home too. And on September 13th of 2019, he rented a house at 3875 East Phelps Street in Gilbert. Brandon will tell you his plan initially was to stay in his own house almost up to the time of the closing and then move into the rental property. You will see a text message that Melanie asked Brandon for his new address. They had children in common, so he didn't think anything of this. And he sent her the address. That was on September 17th. You'll learn that Melanie Boudreau, this defendant's niece, was the only person who knew Brandon's address, who knew 3875 East Phelps Street, and who also knew this defendant and Alex Cox. Brandon barely moved into that house before the shooting. In fact, he'd moved in sooner than he thought because Melanie told him she was going out of town and offered him the kids for an extra weekend. And so he moved in sooner and took the kids while she flew to Rexburg, Idaho on September 26th through the 29th to be with this defendant. So in the weeks leading up to this October 2nd shooting, we'll talk about all of these things that were done in furtherance of this conspiracy, starting with Lori Vallow's Jeep. You'll learn that Alex Cox searched out a place to have extra window tinting put on the Jeep. And I say that because you're going to see the photos from the Jeep in July, and you'll see there's tinting on the windows, but you can still see into it. And so, on September 25th, Alex Cox took that Jeep to Dan's Window Tinting in Rexburg, Idaho, and he paid $200 to put some of the darkest tint you could put on it. You'll see those photos of what that Jeep looked like afterwards. This is the first action of this defendant, Lori Vallow, in the conspiracy, loaning her brother this Jeep and allowing him to put on these dark tint to get it ready so he can lie in wait and no one could see him in the back with that rifle. It is her first mistake, using that Jeep and tying herself to the conspiracy and to the premeditation. Also on September 25th, you're going to learn that Lori Vallow and her accomplice, Alex Cox, went to the Walmart superstore in Idaho Falls. You're going to learn that's not far from Rexburg. And they purchased a burner phone. Now, a burner phone is a phone that you don't have to put your subscriber information to. And so, how do we know that Alex Cox was there and Lori Vallow was there? Well, you're going to learn they each had their own cell phone, like most of us do, and that Alex Cox's cell phone was utilizing Wi-Fi inside that Walmart at the time that burner phone was purchased with cash. And you'll learn that this defendant's cell phone that was subscribed to her was utilizing cell towers in the area of that Walmart at the time that that burner phone was purchased. Lori Vallow and Alex Cox knew that he would need a phone when he drove down here, but they knew you don't want to bring your own phone. You'll be tracked, right? So they bought this burner phone so that Alex would have contact while he drove down here and away. But Alex made a mistake. Because like any other phone, you can still use a burner phone to access Google or your Gmail accounts. And you're going to learn that Alex accessed his Gmail account. In this investigation, you'll learn the police executed many search warrants, and one of them was on Alex Cox's Gmail account, homerjmaximus@gmail.com. You're going to learn that Alex searched for things like window tinting in Rexburg, that he searched for places to practice shooting ranges. You're going to learn that he searched different things about angles or trajectories of shots. You're going to learn that the day before on October 1st and the morning of October 2nd, he searched 3875 East Phelps Street, where Brandon Boudreaux lived. You're going to learn that after the shooting, Alex Cox actually searched for directions on how to get away through a back road. He knew he hadn't killed Brandon. Brandon's calling 911, and so he searched for Pine Top, Holbrook, Moab, Utah, Fillmore, Utah, and eventually Idaho Falls as he made his way back through back roads. You're going to learn that the police also executed search warrants on this defendant's Gmail account, lollytimeforever@gmail.com. On September 30th, the day when her brother took her Jeep and started driving down to Arizona, she searched, quote, how to get the back seat out of my Jeep Wrangler. And she also searched a YouTube video, Jeep Wrangler JK rear seat removal, how to DIY YouTube video. This defendant continued to be a co-conspirator and to aid her accomplice, Alex Cox, by searching how to remove that back seat of the Jeep so he could better lie in wait to shoot Brandon. This was the defendant's second mistake, and more evidence of her being a co-conspirator and the premeditation. This defendant also, on September 30th, began aiding Alex by becoming his alibi. You'll hear from Nick Valance, who is an FBI agent who deals with cellular analysis, that around 4:30 p.m. on September 30th, Alex Cox's cell phone, the one that he subscribed to, moved from his apartment in this same complex where he and Lori Vallow lived to Lori Vallow's unit. And from them on for the next couple days, Alex Cox's phone remained with this defendant. Meanwhile, that burner phone from that Idaho Falls Walmart, this defendant created the alibi. She had Alex Cox's phone call her phone to make it look like he was still in Rexburg, Idaho, instead of in Gilbert, Arizona. That fake call lasted about 24 minutes. Both of those cell phones were using the same cell tower in Rexburg, Idaho. This was Lori Vallow's third mistake. More evidence that she was a co-conspirator and of that premeditation to aid her brother in this shooting of Brandon Boudreaux. So how do we know, though, that Lori Vallow's Jeep drove from Idaho to Arizona? Well, we're going to start by learning about what we call LPRs, or license plate readers. You will learn and see a photo of Lori Vallow's Jeep in Arizona on October 1st of 2019 up near Holbrook on the I-40. You'll hear that the DEA has a license plate reader there, and they took a photo of Lori Vallow's Jeep with that license plate LWD-0997 on its way to Gilbert, Arizona. You're also going to learn that the police later recovered that Jeep back up in Rexburg, and they did a couple different search warrants on it. And what they recovered inside the Jeep, among other things, was a receipt from October 1st of 2019 from Mesa, Arizona, the day before the shooting, from a restaurant called Los Favoritos out on Power Road. You're going to learn that at the time the burner phone is down here in Arizona. You'll learn that Alex Cox was using his Gmail and Googling an address on Power Road around the time when we then see the receipt. Alex Cox, Lori Vallow's Jeep, and Alex's rifle are here in Arizona waiting to commit this shooting. Meanwhile, up in Rexburg, on October 1st, this defendant does a little more additional help. She goes to a storage unit in Rexburg, Idaho, and rents unit C52. The next day, on October 2nd, when the shooting is happening down in Arizona, or after the shooting actually, she brings her soon-to-be husband, Chad Daybell, with her. and you will see video of this as she and Chad Daybell put the rear tire and the rear bench seat of that Jeep into the storage unit. Using the storage unit for that Jeep tire and that bench seat so that her co-conspirator, Alex, could lie in wait in the back of the Jeep, waiting for Brandon to return home that morning. This is, again, evidence of that conspiracy and of the premeditation to kill Brandon. So October 2nd, the morning of this shooting, you will see that Alex Cox was Googling that address, 3875 East Phelps Road. His burner phone from Idaho Falls, Idaho, is in Gilbert, Arizona. He's using his Gmail account, and he is using cell towers around Melanie Boudreau's residence. Now, this is important because Melanie knew that Brandon had their kids. They had 4. She knew that Brandon that morning was going to have to drop off 3 of the kids at school and that they would exchange their youngest. They would meet at a park. Brandon would text Melanie, let her know he was there. She would respond, and they would exchange their youngest child. While Brandon was leaving his house to take his kids to school, that Idaho burner phone moves to his residence and begins waiting for him. Alex kept the Jeep running as he waited for Brandon to return. What Melanie didn't know was that Brandon was going to the gym after dropping off the kids, and so Alex had to wait longer. You'll hear that one of Brandon's neighbors noticed this Jeep. It's a neighborhood that doesn't have any real easy ingress or egress. You'll see a map of it, so there's very little through traffic. And so the neighborhood knows and recognizes most of the same cars. And you'll hear from a neighbor that as he was backing out, he saw this Jeep parked the wrong way on the road, nose to nose with another vehicle that he did recognize. He saw the dark tinting. He saw it was running, and he thought it just stood out as unusual in his neighborhood. It made him actually look into his rearview mirror to note it had a Texas license plate. This was about 30 plus minutes before Brandon arrived home. When Brandon got to the house that day, Alex was ready with the rifle. And we know that he was able to just lift up that back window because the tire wasn't on it. Alex fired 1 shot. Luckily, he did not hit Brandon. You will see that Brandon was driving a Tesla at the time. And unlike many cars, there's no frame around the window. The window just goes into the door, into the car itself. The shot hit the frame of the vehicle, but right where the window goes up into it. And you'll see that there is damage to the window, as well as the bullet hole into the frame of the vehicle itself, right above Brandon's head when he was sitting in that driver's seat. You'll hear that when Brandon took off, the window remained in the door, that he drove away and then eventually circled back around and went into his driveway. You'll hear that for a Tesla, when you put the car in park, the door automatically opens and the whole window just shattered out. Brandon was on the phone with 911 soon after the shooting. You'll hear that call, him actually sounding out of breath from the fear. And he waited for the police to arrive. Alex Cox, of course, is Googling how to get out of there and get back to Rexburg, Idaho. And by October 3rd, he was back there. That same day on October 3rd, you will see that Alex Cox and Lori Vallow went back to the storage unit. They removed that rear tire. They removed the rear seat of the Jeep and took it with them. You will again see video of that. You'll also see that they Googled that day, news in Gilbert, shootings of Brandon, to try to find out what the police knew. How did the police figure out that this defendant and Alex Cox were involved? Well, when the police were interviewing Brandon, they asked him if he had any enemies. Who would want to do this? And Brandon told the police the only people he could think of was Lori Vallow and Alex Cox. He told them that Lori had lived in Texas and that the Jeep had a Texas license plate. And he told them about that incident on July 11th of 2019 in Chandler involving Lori Vallow and Alex Cox. And he believed this was all tied together. You'll hear that the Gilbert police reached out to the Chandler Police Department and learned about that Jeep with the Texas plates, LWD 0997, the same plate that was seen on that license plate reader on October 1st coming into Arizona. The Gilbert police learned that Lori Vallow and Alex Cox were living in Rexburg, Idaho, and they reached out to law enforcement there. You'll hear that on November 1st, police in Idaho went to 565 Pioneer Road, that apartment complex, and they saw Lori Vallow, they saw Alex Cox, and they saw Chad Daybell. They didn't see the Jeep that day, and so they went back a few days later on November 4th and saw the Jeep located near Lori Vallow's residence. Tires back on it, rear seat is back in it. You'll hear that they impounded it. And on November 18th, the Gilbert police flew to Idaho to process it. You're going to learn about GSR, or gunshot residue. You're going to learn that they process the vehicle. Basically, they're little sticky kits. GSR is microscopic. You can't see it. So you try to collect it, and then you give it to an expert to look through it. You will hear that those kits were sent to the Phoenix Police Department and reviewed, and that particles indicative of gunshot residue were located on the kits that were tested from the rear of that Jeep Wrangler, and that this is consistent with a gun being fired from the rear of the Jeep. You also hear that the Gilbert Police Department collected DNA from areas like the steering wheel, the gear shift, seatbelt buckles, and that they got a blood blot from Alexander Cox. DNA profiles were created from the steering wheel and other areas around the driver's seat. And the DNA was found to be a mixture, multiple people, but the major contributor was Alexander Cox. Again, you will hear that the police executed multiple search warrants on cell phones, cell tower usage, data from Gmail accounts, and data from iCloud accounts. You will see a map of Lori Vallow's cell phone, Alex Cox's cell phone, as well as that burner phone from that Walmart in Idaho Falls, the one that was associated to Alex Cox's Gmail account. You will hear from Nick down to Gilbert, Arizona, who was there for the shooting and returned back to Rexburg and was never used again after that. You will learn that the only phone number that burner phone called or received calls from was Chad Daybell, this defendant's soon-to-be husband. The same phone, of course, that was using those cell towers right around Brandon's home at the time of the shooting. This defendant, Lori Vallow Daybell, has been charged with conspiracy to commit the first-degree murder of Brandon Boudreaux on October 2nd of 2019. The evidence in this case will prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that this defendant conspired with Alex Cox and others to kill Brandon. She provided the means, the Jeep, she helped get the Jeep ready, and she tried to provide an alibi for her co-conspirator. At the end of this trial, the state will ask you all to hold this defendant accountable and find her guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, here we are at trial. And the judicial system can be difficult to understand at times. There are laws and rules and statutes that govern how things will proceed in this trial. You yesterday got to hear the preliminary jury instruction, so you kind of got an order of how things are going to go. In order for someone to be charged with a crime, as I have been,
Your Honor, I'm going to object to argument versus an opening statement.
I'll remind the defendant, an opening statement should be a preview of what is to be expected at trial. So go ahead.
that law enforcement presents evidence that they gather, and the state prosecutors are going to present that to you. Sometimes the state charges the defendant with a crime. They have charged me with a crime, a very serious crime. Sometimes they take the allegations to a grand jury to decide if the
I'm
defendant
going
should
to
be charged.
object again, Your Honor. Improper
That's,
argument. Asked to strike.
Hold on. The jury should disregard that last comment. How the charges arrived here are not for the jury's consideration. The prior proceedings are not for the jury's consideration. Please proceed.
The state or the prosecution will then take the information gathered, the evidence from law enforcement, and present to you a story, a theory, their hypothesis of what happened. In this case, the prosecutor was not present during this alleged crime. The Gilbert Police Department was not present during this alleged crime. So it is their job to fill in the gaps, make up a theory, and present it to you, the jury, at trial. This is their job. They are not witness to the actual events because they weren't there that day with Brandon at the house when this alleged shooting occurred. This case is about a conspiracy. And a conspiracy is when two or more people make an agreement to commit a crime. They have to willingly and knowingly participate. Conspiracy is an ancient word that appears in the Bible on many occasions. Judas conspired against Jesus with the chief priests for
I'm going to
30 pieces of silver.
object to, unless this is being presented at trial, I'm not sure that this is appropriate opening.
What is the legal objection?
You're arguing. The opening statement is not argument. I'm going to allow it briefly, but I may cut you off depending on where you're going with that.
Cain conspired against Abel, his brother. This case is a case of conspiracy. The charge against me is that I conspired with my brother, Alex Cox, to murder my niece's husband, Brandon Boudreau. But you will find, as you begin to see the evidence put forth in this case, that there was not any animosity between Brandon and myself. I personally did not have any motivation to have harm come to Brandon. In fact, Brandon and I had a very friendly relationship all of the time that I have known him. I first met Brandon when he was marrying my niece, Melanie.
And Your Honor, I'm going to object to, unless the defendant's
Hold
testifying.
on. Can I have the parties approach briefly? Can I have you approach briefly? Go ahead.
I first met Brandon when he was marrying my niece, Melanie. Melanie and I are very close because my sister, her mother, passed away when she was just 9 years old. So Melanie and I think of each other and love each other like a mother and daughter, even though we are aunt and niece. So our families remained close, Melanie and Brandon's family and my family. And in each other's lives, like everyday lives. We spent holidays together and shared in everyday life. I was there for Melanie and Brandon's wedding and for the birth of all 4 of their children. I was also very close to all 4 of their children. In this case, you will hear Brandon himself tell you that someone shot a gun at his car. You will learn in this testimony that Brandon was not hurt. You will learn that he wasn't even sure what had happened. But you will hear that Brandon immediately blamed me, which begs the question, was I an enemy to Brandon? That is news to me, and hopefully by the end of this trial, we will all have some answers to that question. In this case, you will learn that Brandon had called 911, and Gilbert Police did respond. You will learn that Brandon speaks of a puke green Jeep, and then he offers the officers a camo green color that he's speaking of on his phone. He says a green Jeep. Then you will hear the neighbor who says that it was a dark blue Jeep that was parked in front of the neighbor's house. You will learn that Brandon very quickly hired a private investigator to find out where I was living out of the state of Arizona so he could inform the police. You will see Brandon exchange email information with Detective Pillar, the case agent in this case, about my whereabouts and about the financial dealings of my niece, Melanie Boudreau. You will learn that Brandon was not particularly satisfied with the investigation that Gilbert Police was conducting, so he did his own investigation, hiring his own private investigator to follow his wife, Melanie Boudreau. You will find out that Brandon had access to the VIN number of a Jeep and gave it to the police. You will find out that after that event, he quickly changed his story from a camo green Jeep to a gray Jeep. You will then learn that Brandon continued to provide information he was personally finding out to Detective Pillar, the case agent in this case. You will learn that Detective Pillar and Brandon discussed through email how they can demonstrate Melanie's financial gain if Brandon were to have died around October 2nd, 2019. This is what a conspiracy looks like. Two people trying to set up another person for a crime. My niece, Melanie Boudreau, is named by the state as a co-conspirator. However, she has not been charged with the crime.
I'm going to object
but
and
I
have that
have.
struck as well, Your Honor.
Jury should disregard that statement. You're going to receive an instruction later that all persons that may be involved would not necessarily be charged or called as witnesses, and you'll follow those instructions later. Go ahead.
I was not living in Arizona at the time this alleged incident happened on October 2nd, 2019. I was not even aware such an event had taken place. I did have a close relationship with my brother Alex, but I was not aware of his every move. Melanie also had a close relationship with Alex, but also was not aware of his location at all times. Brandon and Alex also had a good relationship until this accusation. They saw each other frequently at all of our family parties and get-togethers and would often be seen laughing and talking. Alex was a comedian who kept our family laughing. Alex passed away in December 2019 of natural causes, so he is not here to defend himself.
And I'm going to object again to that as well, since he's not party to this. He's
All
not
right,
here.
I'll just remind the jury that what is said in opening statements is not evidence, it's not sworn testimony. Please proceed.
Although the state has alleged that there are several co-conspirators in this case, I am the only one being charged with a crime. So you will be the judge. You will hear and see evidence presented by the state. The state has, according to the law, 100% burden to prove to you
I'm
that
going to
a
object to misstatement
crime-
of the law in terms of 100%.
All right, again, this is a little bit bordering on argument, but the jury will receive the instructions on what is and what is not proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
the state has the burden to prove that a crime has been committed here and that I committed that crime. That is the way the law is written. I do not have to show any evidence or put up a defense. I do not have to testify. That is the law. The prosecutors from the state have to prove to you that I conspired, meaning made an agreement with my brother to murder Brandon. So you will decide, will the state of Arizona and its prosecutors show you enough evidence to convince you that I had anything to do with this alleged crime? And I want you to look carefully and determine if this event was a crime at all. Did a shooting actually occur? Only Brandon claims that it did. Only Brandon names me and Alex. You will learn that Brandon himself did own a gun. You will learn that Brandon knew how to shoot his gun. You will learn that Brandon and Melanie were going through a divorce. And you will learn that even though Brandon is the one who actually filed for a divorce, he was blaming me for his divorce. You will learn that the information that the Gilbert Police Department and Detective Pillar, the case agent on this case, learned about me and my brother Alex was from Brandon Boudreaux. You will learn that Brandon and Detective Pillar communicated frequently and were on a first-name basis. I want you to look closely at the motivation of Brandon and the Gilbert Police Department, because I'm the only one charged with the crime, and I need you to decipher what really happened here, because I'm the only one who's being asked to pay a consequence for this
And
crime.
again, Your Honor, I'm going to ask to object and strike that. There's
Sustained, the jury in their instructions received an instruction that said the jury is not to consider a penalty. That will be in the final instructions area as well. The jury's job is to determine whether or not the state has proved the case beyond a reasonable doubt or the charge beyond a reasonable doubt. Go ahead, proceed.
You will hear many references during this trial about the state versus Vallow Daybell. Well, who is the state? The state are the prosecutors.
I object to argument and relevance.
Sustained.
And you, the jury, are brought in to stand between the state and me.
And I'm going to object again to improper statement of the law, argument, and relevance.
Sustained.
You are here to say if a crime has even been committed at all. You are here to say if I committed this very crime and if the state proved this to you beyond a reasonable doubt. If at the end of this trial you have reasonable doubt, then I remain innocent. If the state does not prove to you that I, 1, committed a crime, and 2, committed this crime, then I remain innocent. In this case, you will hear a lot of speculation. The definition of speculation is an idea or guess about something that is not known. During this trial, the state will try to convince you that I committed this crime by using speculation, innuendo, and insinuation. And the state is hoping that this will be enough. In this trial, you will in fact witness a power struggle between the state and the defendant
Your Honor,
for
I'm
what
going
a
to
fact
object to
really
argument.
is.
Sustained.
Because they want to convince you, the jury, that a fact is speculation, that a fact is innuendo, that a fact is insinuation, that they knew what I was thinking, what I was feeling, what I was planning, when they don't know it all. You, the jury, have all the power to decide what the facts are and what they're not. Not the state, not the judge, not law enforcement. You. So I implore you to listen carefully and decide for yourselves if the state's theory really makes logical sense. What motivation did I have? What malice have I ever shown to anyone? What benefit would I gain? I am a person who loves all people and has no malice towards anyone, not even the prosecutors who wrongfully try to convict me.
Your Honor, I'm going to object again to relevance and to argument.
Sustained.
I am all about spreading love and will continue to do so, even after this trial is complete, no matter the result. Thank you.